Awesome. Well, thank you. Good to see everybody. Just a quick introduction by means of who Vision Tech is. My name is Ben Pidgeon. I'm the managing director. Sorry, just upgraded that title this past past winter. So I've been leading Vision Tech for coming up on 10 years. We've invested in 80 some odd companies, seen about 24 returns. Some are still in process. So through those 10 years, I probably looked at 3,000 some odd deals, had access to hundreds of data rooms, completed due diligence on hundreds of companies, and we still have about 32 million in play. I've even got some brain damage from leading some rounds too, so I don't know if I'm going to do that again. Um, I do really like participation, so there's going to be some call outs that I'd love your best guesses on in terms of numbers. And if I think you're on Google, I'm going to call you out on it. So stay off Google and stay off your phone. But let's have some fun. And I'm here to talk about a topic that I'm really passionate about, which is this idea that there might be a difference between a founder reality and a customer behavior. And the process of due diligence is this development of um, whether or not this is a fantasy the investor wants to believe in, and if they're willing to kind of part ways with their hard-earned capital. So I end up thinking a lot about customer validation of the pain point in my due diligence process, and I'm happy to cover that in the Q&A if you guys want to learn more about our due diligence process, what we typically have gone through. But um, I'm going to kick it off actually with a story about Juicero and a case study. And I want you to put on your investor hat for a little bit. And and with your investor hat on, I'm going to give you some data that might suggest that you'd be willing to write a check. So I'll start off by saying Juicero was founded by this guy named Doug Evans, who who had a successful exit. He had founded a company called Organic Avenue in New York and was sold to private equity. He had a successful exit in this kind of organic food space. And he had identified this market gap. He thought that everybody needed access to cold pressed fresh juice. It was too difficult to get access to fresh juice, and it was too complicated if you have a juicer at home. So he wanted to create this easy button. There was also a very large and growing market in the health and wellness space back when he launched. And his business model was to do a repeat purchase model, just like Keurig or Nespresso. He would sell you the hardware, and then you get a consumable slash subscription that you get on a weekly basis. Um, so with that information, he was able to raise quite a bit of money. Anybody want to guess without looking at Google how much he raised? Give me a number. Successful founder, large growing market, business model. Type it in the
10
chat.
million.
Oh, we got a couple of chats in there.
50 million.
50 million. Saying 10 million. Awesome. Thank you for the participation. He was able to raise an astonishing $120 million from top tier investors like Google Ventures and Kleiner Perkins. So this is signaling a huge venture scale opportunity, but there was a problem. Despite significant investment in this strong market, sales were not materializing. And so now I'm going to ask you to put on your board member hat, or founder hat. What would you do if you had 6 months of runway and sales weren't materializing? I'm not looking for answers here, but I think as investors and CEOs who have had this experience, you're often found in this position of what do I do if I have 6 months and sales aren't coming in? So I just kind of want to open up with that. Not looking for answers. Happy to have them if you want to, but um, I think they were pre-revenue, Joel. I'll share a little bit more detail on that too. Actually, we're foreshadowing a little bit. Um, All right. So yes, this is an image of a drill bit and a hole in the wall. And I'm talking here about understanding your customer needs. And the idea is, if I could pause on this image for a little bit, there's a reason that there's going to be a hole in the wall in this instance. And so when somebody made the decision to purchase this drill bit, they weren't purchasing the drill bit necessarily. They were purchasing the hole in the wall. So people don't buy products, they buy solutions. And it's often about the job to be done, not the product itself. You don't buy a drill bit, you buy the hole. And as I think as founders and even as investors, we get this notion that as soon as we get an idea of what might be needed in the market, we need to go out and start building something as quickly as possible to start testing it. And I would advise to slow down and do a little bit more customer discovery and really understand what's the driving force behind this. Why, in this example, does somebody need to put a hole in a wall? To drive this down a little bit further, to use some examples, Slack, people don't buy Slack for chat features. They buy fewer emails and smoother teamwork. People don't buy Tide Pods for detergent. They buy clean clothes with no measuring mess. In Airbnb, people don't use Airbnb for spare bedrooms. They buy authentic travel experiences and cheaper stays. So slow down, try to understand who you're selling to, why they want to buy, and what the job is that they're trying to accomplish. Some key principles here, and there's an image of a coin on the screen here, but there is something called status quo and loss aversion. Customers are fickle, and it's difficult to get them to make decisions. And it's very easy for your target customer actually to do nothing. Do nothing is a completely reasonable response when you're faced with adopting a new technology. So, and then that plays out through something called loss aversion. We're going to go through a little test here again, but customers don't want better. They want much better. And what's interesting about this is, as you are a new customer considering something new, you are kind of evaluating the cost of adopting a new technology or a new solution, a new product. And that conversion to something new, if there's any losses associated with it, those losses are typically valued at 2 to 3x more than the gains. And that this is called the loss aversion. I don't want to lose something if I know something else works and I can trust its process. So let's play a game, and we're going to do a coin toss. So I'm going to ask you to risk $100, and then I'm going to put $1,000 on the table, and we're going to do a coin flip, and whoever calls it correctly wins $1,100. Oh, show of hands, who's going to do that? I hope that's an easy yes. Actually, that's why I've got it on the slide. Like we're all kind of risk seekers, and this is really a moment that you should be saying, yeah, I'll risk $100 to raise $1,000. So easy yes. Well, let's evolve that into a little bit more of a question. What's the smallest amount that I could come up with to still get your participation? And type this into the chat. What's your number? 100. So Brian says 1 to 1. This would be a real life example on data collection here too. I'm really curious where everybody else is going to come in at. 150, 200, 400. Yeah, 500. So it keeps on climbing. This isn't an auction, by the way. Don't stop. This is not an auction. We're not trying to outbid each other. But um, the data, actually, there's a big study that was done by Steve Blank, and he says the average is right around 2 to 3x, which is what I just mentioned earlier in the slide. These losses are weighted at 2 to 3x more than the gains. And I think this plays out actually in a scenario where, let's say that you're a sales manager and you're using Salesforce for your CRM software to help you manage your pipeline and your deal flow and source new customers. And you've got a startup that comes to you and says, we're better than Salesforce by 20%. Are you going to adopt that solution? Are you even going to entertain some kind of discovery around seeing if that's better than 20% better than Salesforce? And the answer is probably going to be no. 20% is not enough to get you to come off of the current incumbent provider and to get that movement. So we're looking for some huge increases in terms of value creation. Great call out, Sean. I see that 20% is enough to switch a tire brand. Yeah, absolutely. It's a different instance. So I think it is a little circumstantial to kind of throw that out there, but innovation usually comes in software um, and some kind of novelty there. So all right. So new products and services must justify the switching costs. And here's an interesting viewpoint as well. Overconfidence is kind of this critical missed insight. Founders have a tendency to do the opposite of what customers do. Founders overestimate product benefits by an average of 3x. And so if founders are doing this 3x and customers are doing this 3x, there's about a 6x perceptual gap that exists between the founder's belief and this customer willingness to adopt. And that true value proposition in these switching costs lies between these amplified perceptions. So why do customers hesitate to try new solutions? These are just 4 areas that I've seen in terms of cost of switching. And I think it starts with a transaction cost, which is the notion of like, I've got to go through this process of assessing my current needs. What is the sales process? How am I going to search for the new solutions? Where is all the information that I need to evaluate and gather? And how do I negotiate and then actually roll out the new solution? Then there's learning costs. And this is time, effort, and resources needed to really realize the value of adopting this new technology. You might be up against an obsolescence cost, which would also be a sunk cost fallacy. So I've spent time and money on a prior solution that I'm going to have to walk away from. I don't really like that as a consumer behavior. So, and then there's behavioral change. There's a psychological effort required to alter established behavior. So with that as the background, we've got an ideal customer profile, and these are 5 different characteristics that I like to see when I've got a due diligence process. And who actually buys, they're actually going to have the problem, which is really interesting. When I talk to a lot of founders, I might come away with the idea that the target customer may not actually agree with or understand that they have the problem. And they have to recognize that they have to have this problem. If they don't recognize they have the problem, they're not going to be apt to adopt or seek out a solution. A third characteristic is that they are actually searching for a solution. And maybe they've even built a workaround with duct tape or various other pieces of software. And then lastly, they've got to have the budget. So these are 5 characteristics of an ideal customer profile that make your job easier when there's an attempt to sell to your target market. As a bonus, though, they're also accessible to you. They're easily identified and have a similar purchasing pattern with no customization. So just kind of playing out Juicero, what could have Juicero done to validate their market? They could have done some qualification checkboxes with their target customers. They could have asked, am I health conscious? Have I purchased fresh juice? Do I own a juicer at home? Do I regularly purchase premium food or beverage products? These are really good kind of am I in the guardrails of selling to the person that might actually buy what I'm trying to offer for Juicera? And then they could move into these screening questions of, do you care about your health? Would you drink more fresh juice if it were convenient? Do you think this product is a good idea? How important is sustainability to you? Do you like the taste of fresh juice? Are those good questions?
No.
They're horrible questions. Yes, thank you, Taylor. I appreciate that. Yes, this doesn't get you anything closer to knowledge about your customer behavior and why they choose to drink fresh juice. So they could have. Here's some better questions actually. Current habits. How do you consume juice, if at all? Pain points. What, if anything, frustrates you about your current solutions? When choosing a juice, what matters to you? If a product could give you fresh juice at home with little or no cleanup, how likely would you be to try it? And then lastly, what feels like a reasonable price? So these are all much better questions that might give you some insight around current habits, pain points, value trade-off, adoption, and willingness to pay. A couple of warning signs. People stop telling you, or I'm sorry, um, I I get a lot of inbound inquiries about companies that are trying to fundraise, and it always starts with "I'm building." And I would suggest that as a founder or even as an investor, we need to kind of shift the conversation to what have you experienced and why is this a pain point that's worth solving? Um, Start asking questions about their frustrations, backgrounds, and challenges. A warning sign, though, is, and I tell my kids this, so I hope I don't offend anybody when I say this, but you have two ears and one mouth and use them in that order, in that proportion, right? You should be listening more than you're talking. If somebody's just complimenting your idea, it's likely they're just trying to get out of the conversation. Think about what you would tell your mom and how your mom might react to to your idea that you're so passionate about. She's gonna kind of say yes and nod and move on to the next conversation. Be wary if you've told them about your idea and you don't have clear next steps. If you're not taking notes, so these are all things that you should not be doing. Watch out for them. And the last question I think is one that I also like to focus on. Um, if you're not scared of some of the answers that you're asking to any of the questions that you've asked, then you may not be asking the right questions. I think you want to be a little fearful of what you might hear and recognize that it might not agree with your understanding of the pain point or the solution that you're trying to bring to market. Um, I get a lot of value out of trying to push the limit on that. You know, and the way that it plays out is through confirmation bias. I think investors and founders end up having something called happy ears. Happy ears are when you only hear what you want to hear, and when something comes about that doesn't necessarily agree with your thesis, you kind of discount it. And that's probably the moment to double down and really try to understand why somebody made a comment and dig into it. So direct conversations are critical for validating some of these assumptions. You got to engage with key stakeholders. Um, we kind of joke around that organic revenue coming from your customers is actually a source of non-dilutive funding. And that means that it creates a lot of optionality for you if you can capture revenue from your clients. So conduct direct conversations, understand your economic buyers and internal champions. Understand that you might have a different process if you're trying to go to market with a $9.99 a month business model versus a $50,000, $100,000 annual subscription. Those are going to be two different sales models and timelines. I think going through the problem, reality, and pain. I think this is a really big one too. When I get into my customer discovery questions, is to ask them how are they measuring or what is their ROI and how do they manage their business is extremely insightful because it shows you that they are um, they're in one of the five categories that I mentioned earlier. They're trying to improve their business. If they don't have a metric, it means that it's not important enough for them to move, and you're going to have to convince them of a metric that they're going to have to take action on. Current solutions and switching triggers, you got to understand what they're currently doing to solve this pain point or to do this job and what would motivate them to switch. And then again, mind your biases. We all get happy years. I mentioned that earlier. Um, but without this validation, you should expect additional speculation and risk. So what Juicero should have done, they should have embraced these validation tools. They jumped right past the what and why of customer needs and directly into how. You might be looking at Google by now, but Juicero had raised $120 million to build this over-engineered juicer. And the juicer would sit on your desk or on your countertop right next to your coffee maker. And the only way that you could get it to interact with you is to log in through your phone on your Wi-Fi and hit juice. You had to put your cup underneath it, and there were no buttons on it. Very simple, over-engineered product. But they had raised so much and spent so much on engineering, they had a price point. And anybody want to guess what the price point is? What did they go out to market with the price point?
700.
Yeah, Taylor, you're on Google. I'll call you out on that, or you know about it. It was
No,
700 on the dot.
no Googling here.
That's great. No, you called it. It was $700 for a juicer. And I think the reality of the situation too is that customers were fearful of this appliance graveyard. I mean, if one person can afford it, that doesn't mean that the mass markets will be able to afford it. And so they had a lot of assumptions around customer behavior that ended up not being true, but they had this beautiful product. And the downfall, this is really kind of a wild story, but the downfall of this company was sales weren't materializing. They had a short runway, and one of their investors, who was also a board member, one morning pressed his juice, and then he was about to throw away the juice packet when he realized that there was extra juice in the packet, and he wondered if he could squeeze the packet to get more juice out over his cup. So that's what he did, and that was the end of the beginning of the end, actually. So they lost confidence in kind of what the company was doing. So embrace these validation tools, conduct these surveys, get letters of intent, observe behavior in grocery markets. You still had to go to the grocery market to get these packets in some instances. Do these observe how people behave in their own kitchen. But slow down, don't build, and learn. That's kind of the key takeaway. But in reality, investors end up investing in assumptions about customer behavior. And so it's important to ask which assumptions are validated, which ones are guesses, and what are we ignoring? Most of our losses don't come from bad ideas, they come from untested, unidentified assumptions. And Juicero just had this unfulfilled promise. Problem was validated, benefits didn't outweigh switching costs, founder belief was way above customer reality. And so I would love to hear about the pain point that you've identified and how you validated it. I'm also in the process of raising a fund. I'd love to talk to you more about that if given a chance, but probably more on a one-on-one opportunity. And that's the end of my presentation.
Ben, thank you. Great presentation. Really appreciate it. There are a few questions in the chat, and I would encourage everybody to throw any other questions you have in there, and we can queue up some hot seat Q&A for Ben. Let's see.
Yeah, there is a lot in here, and there's a lot of chatter because of the questions that I asked. So I'm not. How do you want to go at this?
I was just scrolling through them. You mentioned this a little bit, but the first question I had was when the competition is do nothing or there's not a solution that is that you would be supplanting in the market necessarily, like if there's a new diagnostic for a doctor and they currently don't have a diagnostic for that disease, how do you find what the multiple on the value is, or what it would cost for them, what it would need to produce value wise for them?
That's a really great question, actually, and we do a lot of life science, so I feel somewhat familiar with that because we have seen some new diagnostic companies that we've invested in, and I'm not sure that I have an answer for you, but I would go down the path of understanding what the diagnosis means in terms of accuracy for the patient and the provider, and then to understand what they can do with the data. Because sometimes what happens is when you have a new diagnosis that's maybe an earlier cancer detection, if there's not a next step that you can do to prevent that cancer now that you know that you've tested positive for it, then you have a much longer path to commercialization because now that has to be built out. So to take a step back then also and kind of go out the other way, if you have a new diagnosis and it's for an earlier cancer detection and there's current solutions out on the market, you should go directly to them and ask them how do they get their patients. And there's a direct value creation relationship there that could be leveraged.
Marco asked, what's one question you always ask that gives the most insight?
Um, it is always a little nuanced. So you get into these conversations, but a question that we always kind of try to flush out with these customers is if your current solution went away today, how would that impact you? And that ends up getting flushed out a lot of different ways. You hear a lot of different answers. If the answer is it wouldn't really impact me that much, then there's not a lot of value creation. If the answer is it would cost me 6 months and millions of dollars, then there's a lot of value creation there. So we always end up saying, you know, what would happen if the current solution went away today? I think the other thing that I get a lot of value out of and trying to understand how did that customer come to know this solution? There's typically two different paths that I've heard. One path is I've known this guy or gal for 20 years. And because of that 20-year relationship, I have trust and confidence that they're going to deliver the solution. The alternative to that is we recognize that we had a pain point, and I was given budget to go out and search for a solution on Google. I identified 5 or 6 criteria that I needed to solve. I found 5 companies that did what I thought they would do to meet my needs and my job to be done. I evaluated those 5 companies and I settled on this one for the XYZ reasons. Both of those are very unique. In the first example, that's a Rolodex sale. It could be valuable. It could be misleading. That needs to transition into an unfriendly sale where you've got to go into a competitive bid situation to still win. The company that I described that went through Google and did an evaluation process on that, they fought tooth and nail for that sale, and they've got a kind of watch, rinse, repeat sales process that is probably at a scalable version.
Interesting. Thank you. Another question was, how many interviews is actually enough before you feel confident moving forward?
From a founder's perspective or for an investor?
Both.
Yeah. It depends actually. I would say from an investor's perspective, I feel confident when we're in that probably 2 to 3 customer interview range. But I think from an CEO inventor's position, I would multiply that by a factor of 20. You got to talk to a lot of people.
Yeah. Sean suggested 10 to 30. What we have found in our work is um, you pivot around 10, between 10 and 20,
Yeah.
and there's usually two, maybe three pivots before you land on the exact right solution. But also one way we've kind of done it is when you start getting a strong signal. So it's tough to get a signal with three interviews unless they all say, yes, I love it. Here's my money. If one of them has any reservations, then the signal isn't 100% strong or may not be strong enough for your risk tolerance.
Yep.
Last question. I know we're a bit over time, but Corrine said, could you comment on the use of synthetic data for buyer insights to augment real customer interviews, especially when customers are not readily available?
Um, so I would say, my N of one, right? I think Taylor's probably going to answer here too. Maybe we can have a conversation around this, but the idea of creating synthetic data through a chat GPT or some kind of AI agent is not a substitute for customer behavior and somebody actually having budget to make a decision. Um, it it will give you good insights on what questions to ask, but I think you still need to talk to the customers or find some kind of best effort into landing that initial conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a great way to figure out what questions to ask and what assumptions to push on. Also, um, don't if you're going to start that way, don't just go after the end user in your discussion in terms of synthetic data. You've got to build a whole buying panel. So financial buyer, decision maker, end user, influencer, anyone who could say, no, don't buy this in the company that you're selling to or the person you're selling to. Um,
Yep.
Ben, thank you so much. This was phenomenal. Great insights. Really appreciate your time. If people do want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
I'll share my email and my phone number again here, and then I'll type it into the chat.
Perfect. Awesome. Really appreciate it again, Ben. And thanks everybody for coming. We do this every week at the same time. So make sure you're following Midday Connect on LinkedIn so you get all the announcements and the schedule. Ben, you've got your contact in the chat. So please, everybody, just feel free to reach out to Ben if you've got any questions and appreciate you all being here. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'll do one more call out. Give us a follow on LinkedIn. Happy to have more followers there.
Perfect.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks all. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Bye.